What if the greatest love of your life didn't begin with a romantic date, but with a car stuck in the snow? In the breathtaking mountains of Banff, Canada, a lonely architect meets a kind-hearted wildlife photographer after a winter storm changes both of their lives forever. What starts as a simple act of kindness soon grows into a marriage filled with love, sacrifice, heartbreak, and hope. But when life tests their relationship in ways they never imagined, will their love be strong enough to survive? This is the unforgettable story of Ethan and Olivia, a reminder that true love isn't about perfect moments. It's about standing beside each other through every season of life. The winter that changed everything, snow drifted gently across the towering peaks of Banff National Park, covering the roads in a blanket of white. The mountains looked peaceful, almost magical, but beneath that beauty was a silence that could make anyone feel completely alone. Driving through the winding highway was Ethan Brooks, a 32-year-old architect from Calgary. People often described Ethan as successful. He owned a respected architecture firm, lived in a modern home overlooking the Bow River, and had achieved everything he had once dreamed of. Yet every evening, when he unlocked the front door, he was greeted by nothing but silence. No laughter, no conversation, just an empty house. Ever since losing his parents in a car accident 8 years earlier, Ethan had buried himself in work. Designing buildings was easier than dealing with emotions. Blueprints made sense. Feelings didn't. His grandmother, Grace Brooks, often called him every Sunday. "You're building beautiful homes for strangers," she would say with a warm laugh, "but when will you build a home for yourself?" Ethan always smiled politely before changing the subject. Love wasn't something he believed in anymore. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. That Friday afternoon, Ethan left Calgary for Banff to inspect a luxury mountain resort his company had designed. The weather forecast had warned of heavy snowfall, but Ethan was determined to finish the project before Christmas. As he drove deeper into the Rockies, snowflakes grew larger. Soon they danced wildly across the windshield. The road became slippery. Visibility dropped with every passing minute. His phone suddenly lost signal. "Perfect," Ethan muttered, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. The GPS screen froze. Now it was just him, the mountains, and the storm. A sharp curve appeared ahead. Ethan slowed down, but it was already too late. The tires lost their grip. The SUV slid sideways across the icy road. For one terrifying second, the world spun in complete silence. Then thud. The vehicle came to a stop against a snowbank. The engine was still running. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding against his chest. "I'm okay," he whispered to himself. He stepped outside into the freezing wind and looked at the trapped SUV. It wasn't badly damaged, but the wheels were buried deep in snow. He tried pushing. Nothing. He searched for a phone signal. Still nothing. Snow continued falling harder. The highway had become almost empty. For the first time in years, Ethan realized he wasn't in control. And he had no idea that, just a few moments later, a stranger would arrive with a simple act of kindness that would quietly change the course of his entire life. The icy wind howled through the mountains as Ethan stood beside his stranded SUV. Snowflakes covered his coat within minutes. He pushed the vehicle again with all his strength. The tires spun, but the SUV refused to move. Ethan let out a frustrated sigh. Come on, not today. The highway was almost deserted. Minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The temperature kept dropping. Just as Ethan began wondering whether he would have to spend the night in his car, headlights appeared through the thick snowfall. A dark green pickup truck slowed down and pulled over a few meters ahead. The driver's door opened. A young woman stepped out, bundled in a bright red winter jacket, a knitted white scarf wrapped around her neck, and snow boots that crunched softly against the ice. She glanced at Ethan, then at the SUV buried in the snow. With a small smile, she called out, "Looks like the mountain decided to keep your car." Ethan couldn't help but smile back. "I think it's winning." She walked closer, brushing snow from her gloves. "I'm Olivia Carter." "Ethan Brooks." Without another word, Olivia opened the back of her truck and pulled out a sturdy tow rope. "Good thing I never leave home without this." "You carry a tow rope?" Ethan asked, surprised. She laughed. "I live in Banff. Around here, winter always has a surprise waiting." Together, they secured the rope between the two vehicles. Olivia climbed back into her truck. Ethan returned to his SUV. The engine of the pickup growled as Olivia gently accelerated. The rope tightened. For a second, nothing happened. Then the SUV slowly climbed out of the snowbank. Ethan finally steered it safely back onto the road. Relief washed over his face. He stepped out again, smiling. "I owe you one." Olivia shrugged. Maybe she reached into her truck and returned with a stainless steel thermos. Pouring steaming coffee into a small travel cup, she handed it to him. "You look like you need this more than I do." The rich aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the crisp mountain air. Ethan wrapped his cold hands around the warm cup. "Thank you. It's just coffee," Olivia said with a gentle smile. "No," Ethan replied quietly. "It's more than that." For a brief moment, they stood together in the falling snow. Neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. Then Olivia checked the darkening sky. "You should get going. Another storm is moving in." Ethan nodded. "I hope I get the chance to return the favor someday." She smiled, climbed back into her truck, and before driving away, rolled down her window. "Drive carefully this time, Ethan." He laughed. "I'll try." As her truck disappeared into the curtain of snow, Ethan looked down at the warm cup still in his hands. He had met countless people throughout his life, business partners, clients, friends, but somehow a stranger's simple kindness had left a deeper impression than years of empty conversations. He didn't know her story. He didn't know if he would ever see her again. But one thing was certain. The lonely drive to Banff no longer felt quite so lonely. For the rest of the drive, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the red jacket. It wasn't just that she had helped him. It was the way she had smiled as if helping a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. The warm cup of coffee sat in the cup holder beside him, its gentle aroma filling the car. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel so heavy. The next morning, Ethan finished inspecting the luxury mountain resort. The project had gone smoothly, but instead of driving straight back to Calgary, he found himself wandering through the quiet streets of Banff. Snow covered the rooftops, and colorful lights hung outside the small wooden shops. Tourists laughed as they walked along the sidewalks, while children built snowmen in a nearby park. Ethan smiled to himself. Maybe one more walk before heading home, he thought. As he turned onto Bear Street, something caught his attention. A small sign hanging above a cozy wooden building read, "Northern Light Gallery." The front window displayed breathtaking photographs of snowy forests, frozen lakes, wolves, elk, and the glowing northern lights dancing across the Canadian sky. Curious, Ethan stepped inside. The warm scent of cedar wood welcomed him. The walls were covered with framed photographs, each one capturing the quiet beauty of nature. As he admired a picture of a lone wolf standing beneath the moonlight, a familiar voice spoke behind him. "I was wondering if you'd ever learn to stay on the road." Ethan turned around. Standing there, smiling with amusement, was Olivia Carter. She wore a soft cream-colored sweater, her long brown hair falling over her shoulders. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan laughed. "So, this is where you disappear after rescuing stranded drivers?" Olivia crossed her arms playfully. "Only the lucky ones find this place." She explained that the gallery belonged to her late father. After his passing, she had continued his dream, selling her wildlife photography and leading nature tours during the warmer months. Ethan slowly looked around the room. "You took all these photographs?" Olivia nodded. "Every single one." He paused in front of a breathtaking image of the northern lights reflecting across Lake Louise. "It's incredible." She smiled softly. "Nature is patient. It teaches you to slow down." Ethan looked at the photograph for another moment. "I don't think I've slowed down in years." Olivia studied his face for a brief second. "Then, maybe Banff brought you here for a reason." Her words lingered in his mind. For the next hour, they talked about everything: architecture, photography, travel, favorite books, childhood memories. To Ethan's surprise, the conversation flowed effortlessly. There were no awkward silences, no need to impress each other. Just two strangers sharing stories as snow quietly fell outside. When Ethan finally checked his watch, he couldn't believe 3 hours had passed. "I should head back to Calgary," he said reluctantly. Olivia nodded. "But you'll come back to Banff someday." It wasn't a question. For reasons he couldn't explain, it felt like a promise. Ethan smiled. "I think I will." As he walked toward the door, Olivia called after him. "Oh, Ethan." He turned. "This time, try not to drive into any snowbanks." He laughed. "I'll do my best." Leaving the gallery, Ethan glanced back through the window. Olivia was arranging photographs on the wall, completely unaware that she had already changed something inside him. For the first time in years, he was actually looking forward to coming back. Over the next few months, Ethan found himself making more trips to Banff than his work actually required. Sometimes he told himself he was checking on the resort project. Other times, he claimed he simply needed a break from the city. But deep down, he knew the real reason. It was Olivia. Almost every visit ended the same way, with the two of them sharing coffee after the gallery closed. They talked for hours about life, dreams, and the little things most people never noticed. With Olivia, conversations never felt forced. Silence never felt awkward. It felt peaceful. One Saturday morning, Olivia invited Ethan on a photography hike. "I have to capture sunrise at Moraine Lake," she said. "But fair warning, we leave at 5 in the morning." Ethan laughed. "I usually don't wake up that early unless a building is on fire. Then consider this an emergency," Olivia teased. "The mountains are calling." The next morning, long before sunrise, they drove through the quiet roads of Banff National Park. The sky was still dark when they reached the lake. Snow covered the rocky shoreline, and the frozen water reflected the first hints of dawn. As the sun slowly rose behind the mountains, golden light spilled across the snow. Olivia lifted her camera. "Perfect." Click, click, click. She moved carefully, capturing every ray of light. Ethan watched her instead of the sunrise. There was something beautiful about the way she saw the world. While everyone else looked at mountains, she noticed the light. The colors, the tiny details that most people ignored. She lowered her camera and caught him staring. "What?" He smiled. "Nothing. No. Seriously, you make ordinary moments look extraordinary." For a second, Olivia was speechless. A faint blush appeared on her cheeks. "That's probably the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." As winter slowly turned into spring, their friendship became something deeper. They explored hidden waterfalls, walked through fields of wildflowers, watched elk grazing in quiet valleys, and on rainy afternoons, they sat inside the gallery, drinking hot chocolate while listening to soft music. One evening, Ethan admitted something he had never told anyone outside his family. "I lost my parents 8 years ago." Olivia quietly reached across the table and placed her hand over his. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer advice. She simply listened. When he finished speaking, she squeezed his hand gently. "You don't have to carry that pain alone anymore." Those simple words broke down a wall Ethan had spent years building around his heart. For the first time since his parents' passing, he allowed himself to believe that happiness was still possible. Weeks later, Ethan invited Olivia to dinner in Calgary. Afterward, they walked along the Bow River as the city lights shimmered on the water. The evening was calm. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Ethan stopped walking. He looked at Olivia with a nervous smile. "I've designed hundreds of buildings." She tilted her head curiously. "But somehow, telling you this is the hardest thing I've ever done." Olivia smiled softly. "What is it?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I think I stopped coming to Banff because of work a long time ago." She already knew what he meant. "I came because of you." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from joy. She stepped closer. "So, does that mean this is our first official date?" Ethan laughed. "If you'll say yes." Instead of answering with words, Olivia gently took his hand, and together, beneath the glowing lights of the Bow River, they began the first chapter of a love story neither of them had ever expected. The months that followed were the happiest Ethan had experienced in years. For the first time, his weekends were no longer filled with meetings and deadlines. Instead, they were filled with road trips to Banff, quiet dinners, long walks through the mountains, and endless conversations with Olivia. Their relationship felt effortless. There were no games, no pretending to be someone they weren't. They simply enjoyed being together. As autumn arrived, the forests around Banff turned shades of gold and crimson. One Saturday afternoon, Olivia invited Ethan to photograph the changing leaves along a quiet mountain trail. She was busy adjusting her camera settings when Ethan secretly checked the small velvet box hidden inside his jacket pocket. His heart was racing. He had carried that ring for nearly 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. But every time he looked at Olivia, he became nervous. What if the moment never feels perfect? He thought. A few weeks later, the first snowfall of the year covered Lake Louise in brilliant white. Olivia stood near the frozen shoreline, taking photographs as soft snowflakes drifted through the air. She turned around to call Ethan. "Ethan, look at this light. It's beautiful." But Ethan wasn't looking at the mountains. He was looking at her. He slowly walked toward her, his boots crunching softly in the fresh snow. Olivia noticed the unusual expression on his face. "Everything okay?" Instead of answering, Ethan reached into his coat. He pulled out the small velvet box. Then, with a deep breath, he knelt on one knee. Olivia's eyes widened in complete surprise. The world around them seemed to fall silent. Even the wind felt as though it had stopped. "Ethan," he smiled nervously. "The day we met, you pulled my car out of a snowbank." Olivia laughed through the tears already forming in her eyes. "But you did something much bigger than that. You pulled me out of the loneliness I'd been living in for years." His voice trembled slightly. "You taught me that home isn't a place. It's a person." He opened the ring box. Inside was a simple white gold ring with a small sparkling diamond. "Olivia Carter, you've become my favorite reason to smile, my favorite adventure, my safest place. So, will you marry me?" For a second, Olivia couldn't speak. Tears rolled gently down her cheeks as she covered her mouth with both hands. Then she nodded again and again. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. The moment he stood up, Olivia wrapped her arms around him tightly. Around them, soft snow continued falling over the frozen lake, as though nature itself was celebrating their promise. 6 months later, family and close friends gathered at a small wooden chapel overlooking the mountains of Banff. There were no hundreds of guests, no extravagant decorations, no luxurious ballroom, just towering pine trees, fresh mountain air, and the people who truly mattered. Ethan's grandmother, Grace Brooks, smiled proudly from the front row. As Olivia walked down the aisle in a simple white gown, Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. She looked radiant. When she reached him, she whispered with a playful smile, "So no snowbanks today?" Ethan laughed softly. "I learned my lesson." The ceremony was short but deeply meaningful. They exchanged heartfelt vows, promising to stand by each other through every season of life, not just the beautiful ones. When the officiant finally said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Ethan gently kissed Olivia as applause echoed through the chapel. Outside, snowflakes drifted from the sky once again. The same snow that had brought two strangers together had now witnessed the beginning of their forever. The first 2 years of Ethan and Olivia's marriage felt almost like a dream. They bought a cozy wooden home just outside Banff, where every morning they woke up to the sight of snow-capped mountains and tall pine trees swaying gently in the wind. The house wasn't large. It didn't need to be. To them, it was perfect. On weekends, Olivia filled the walls with her latest wildlife photographs, while Ethan spent his afternoons building wooden shelves, insisting that everything in the house should have been made with love. Every evening, they cooked dinner together. Sometimes the food turned out delicious. Other times, it became a running joke. One night, Ethan accidentally added sugar instead of salt to the pasta sauce. Olivia laughed so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. "I think you've just invented dessert pasta." Ethan grinned. "Maybe I'm starting a new Canadian tradition." Life wasn't perfect, but it was happy. And for both of them, that was enough. One cold November morning, Ethan arrived at his architecture firm in Calgary expecting an ordinary workday. Instead, he was greeted by worried faces. His business partner, Daniel, was waiting in the conference room. "Ethan, we have a serious problem." Several of the company's biggest investors had pulled out of a luxury development project after unexpected environmental regulations halted construction. Millions of dollars were suddenly frozen. Contracts were canceled. Clients demanded refunds. Within weeks, the company that Ethan had spent nearly a decade building was on the edge of collapse. At first, Ethan tried to stay optimistic. "It's only temporary," he told Olivia. "We'll recover." But each passing week brought more bad news. Employees had to be laid off. Projects disappeared. Bills continued to arrive. The pressure became overwhelming. Slowly, the cheerful man Olivia had married began to disappear. He stopped laughing. He stopped sleeping. Dinner often grew cold before he even noticed it was on the table. Late at night, Olivia would find him sitting alone in the living room, staring silently at financial reports spread across the coffee table. She gently placed a cup of tea beside him. "You should get some rest." Without looking up, Ethan sighed. "I can't. If this company fails, everything I've worked for is gone." Olivia sat beside him. She rested her head on his shoulder. "We'll get through this." But Ethan barely heard her. The fear inside him had become louder than the voices of the people who loved him. Weeks turned into months. One evening, Ethan came home long after sunset. He quietly hung up his coat and stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Olivia was preparing dinner. She smiled when she saw him. "You're home." But Ethan didn't smile back. His eyes looked tired. Defeated, he slowly sat at the table and whispered, "I think I ruined our future." Olivia immediately turned off the stove and sat across from him. "What happened?" Ethan looked down at his hands. "I had to mortgage the office. And if things don't improve," he couldn't finish the sentence. Silence filled the room. Finally, he looked at her with tears in his eyes. "You made the biggest mistake of your life by marrying me." Olivia's heart broke hearing those words. She reached across the table and held both of his hands firmly. "No, the best decision of my life was saying yes." Ethan shook his head. "I can't even give you the life you deserve anymore." Olivia smiled gently. "Ethan, I didn't marry your company. I married you. If we lose the house, we'll find another. If we lose the money, we'll earn it again. But if we lose each other, that's something money can never replace. For the first time in months, Ethan looked directly into her eyes. She wasn't worried about expensive vacations. She wasn't thinking about luxury cars. She was thinking about him. And somehow, that made him cry even harder. Olivia stood up, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around him. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes, love doesn't need speeches. Sometimes, it simply stays. That night, after Ethan finally fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from weeks of stress, Olivia quietly looked toward the hallway where her photography studio was. Inside the room sat dozens of framed awards and the professional camera she had dreamed of owning since she was a teenager. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she whispered to herself, "If I have to choose between my dream and my husband, I already know my answer." She turned off the lights, closed the studio door, and made a decision that Ethan knew nothing about, a decision that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, Ethan left for Calgary before sunrise. He barely touched his breakfast. "Don't wait up for dinner," he said quietly as he picked up his briefcase. "I'll probably be working late again." Olivia forced a smile. "Drive safely." Ethan nodded and walked out the door. A few seconds later, she heard his car disappear down the snowy road. The house became silent. Olivia stood in the middle of her photography studio. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dozens of framed photographs hanging on the walls. There were wolves beneath the northern lights, a grizzly bear crossing a river, a lonely pine tree standing through a blizzard. Every picture held a memory. Every picture reminded her why she had fallen in love with photography. Then her eyes rested on the camera sitting on the wooden desk. It wasn't just any camera. It had taken her nearly 8 years of saving to afford it. It had traveled with her across Canada's mountains, forests, and frozen lakes. It had become a part of her life. She gently picked it up. Running her fingers across the lens, she whispered, "You've given me so many beautiful memories." A tear rolled down her cheek. But now it's time to create one more. That afternoon, Olivia drove into Calgary. She walked into a professional camera store where she knew the owner, an elderly man named Mr. Harris. He smiled warmly when he saw her. "Olivia, looking for new equipment?" She quietly placed the camera on the counter. "I'm actually here to sell it." Mr. Harris looked surprised. "Sell it? But this is your favorite camera. You once told me you'd never part with it." Olivia smiled sadly. Sometimes life asks us to choose what's more important. The old man looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, understanding there was a story she wasn't ready to tell. After inspecting the camera, he handed her a check. "It's worth every dollar." Olivia accepted it with trembling hands. As she walked out of the shop, she couldn't stop the tears. She wasn't crying because she'd lost a camera. She was crying because she had quietly let go of a dream. Over the next few days, Olivia used the money to help cover several overdue mortgage payments and utility bills. She even made an anonymous payment toward one of Ethan's business loans through the bank. She never told him. She didn't want him to feel guilty. To her, marriage wasn't about keeping score. It was about carrying each other when one person became too tired to walk. A week later, Ethan returned home earlier than usual. For the first time in months, he looked hopeful. "I think things might finally be improving," he said. Olivia smiled. "I'm so happy to hear that." As Ethan walked through the house, he noticed something strange. The door to Olivia's photography studio was open. The wooden desk looked unusually empty. He frowned. "Where's your camera?" Olivia hesitated for just a second. "Oh, I packed it away." Something about her answer didn't feel right. Later that evening, while searching for an old folder in the home office. Ethan accidentally found an envelope lying inside a drawer. It had the logo of the camera store. Curious, he opened it. Inside was the receipt. Items sold. Professional wildlife camera kit. His heart stopped. He stared at the paper in disbelief. No, his hands began to shake. He quickly walked into the living room where Olivia was folding laundry. Holding the receipt, he asked softly, "Olivia, what is this?" She looked at the paper, then at Ethan. For a moment, she said nothing. Finally, she sighed gently. "I was hoping you wouldn't find out." "You sold your camera?" She nodded. Ethan's voice cracked. "Why?" Olivia walked closer until they were standing face to face. "Because you needed help. You should have told me. And let you blame yourself?" She shook her head. "No, I know you, Ethan. You would have never accepted it." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "That camera was your dream." Olivia smiled through her own tears. "My dream was never the camera. It was the life we were building together." She gently placed her hand against his cheek. "I can always buy another camera someday. But I could never replace you." Ethan could no longer hold back his emotions. He wrapped his arms around her and broke down crying. "I'm so sorry. You've sacrificed everything for me." Olivia hugged him tightly. "No, I invested in us." For several minutes, they stood there in silence, holding each other as snowflakes drifted past the living room window. Outside, winter still covered the world in white. But inside that little house, love had never felt warmer. That night, after Olivia had fallen asleep, Ethan quietly sat by the fireplace. He looked at the receipt one last time before folding it carefully and placing it in his wallet. It wasn't just a receipt anymore. It was a reminder. A reminder that the greatest acts of love are often the ones no one is meant to see. At that moment, Ethan made a silent promise to himself. One day, somehow, he would give Olivia back the dream she had given up for him. The following morning, Ethan woke up before sunrise. He quietly looked at Olivia sleeping peacefully beside him. For months, he had been so consumed by his failing business that he hadn't truly seen what was standing right in front of him. A woman who had never asked for expensive gifts. A woman who had never complained about long nights or canceled plans. A woman who had quietly sacrificed her greatest passion just to keep their family together. Ethan gently kissed her forehead. In that moment, he made himself a promise. No matter how difficult it becomes, I'm not giving up. That same day, Ethan drove to his office in Calgary with a different mindset. Instead of focusing on everything he had lost, he began searching for opportunities. He spent hours reviewing old project files, calling former clients, and reaching out to business partners he hadn't spoken to in years. Most of the calls ended with polite rejections. Some weren't answered at all. But Ethan kept going. Because for the first time, he wasn't fighting for a company. He was fighting for the woman who believed in him when he had stopped believing in himself. 2 weeks later, just as Ethan was about to leave the office, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed a familiar name, Lucas Bennett. Lucas had been Ethan's closest friend since university and now owned a successful construction company in Vancouver. "Ethan," Lucas said, "I heard about everything that's happened." Ethan smiled weakly. News travels fast. It does. There was a brief pause before Lucas continued. "I've been offered a large eco-resort project in British Columbia. We need an architect. And I told them there's only one person I trust for the job." Ethan was speechless. "Lucas, that's a huge project." "I know. But I also know you're the best architect I've ever worked with." For the first time in months, hope returned. The following weeks were exhausting. Ethan worked day and night preparing designs, presentations, and environmental plans. Sometimes he stayed awake until 2 or 3 in the morning. Every night, Olivia left a cup of hot tea on his desk. Sometimes she quietly massaged his shoulders. Sometimes she simply sat beside him, reading a book in silence. She knew he didn't always need advice. Sometimes he just needed someone beside him. One evening, Ethan looked up from his computer. "Olivia?" She smiled. "Yeah? I'm scared." She closed her book. "Of what?" "If this project fails," she gently interrupted him. "And if it succeeds?" He blinked. "I haven't really thought about that." Olivia laughed softly. "Then maybe it's time you did." Her faith in him was stronger than his fear. 3 months later, the final presentation took place in Vancouver. Ethan stood before a room filled with investors, engineers, and government officials. His hands trembled slightly as he began explaining his vision. He spoke about sustainable architecture, protecting forests, designing buildings that blended naturally with the mountains instead of competing against them. When he finished, the room fell silent. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then one investor slowly stood up. Another followed. Soon the entire room was applauding. The lead investor walked over and extended his hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Brooks. We'd like to offer your company the contract." Ethan could barely believe what he had heard. It was the biggest project of his career. The contract would save his company. Every employee he had feared losing could now keep their job. Months of worry, sleepless nights, and silent prayers had finally led to this moment. Late that evening, Ethan drove back to Banff. The mountain roads were once again covered in fresh snow. As he reached home, he rushed through the front door. Olivia. She came running from the kitchen, looking worried. What happened? Instead of answering, Ethan wrapped her in the biggest hug of his life. "We did it." She looked up at him. "We?" He smiled through happy tears. "There is no me without you. We got the contract. Our future is safe." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She laughed and cried at the same time as she hugged him tightly. "I knew you could do it." Ethan gently pulled back and looked into her eyes. "No, you knew. I had forgotten. And you reminded me." Outside, snowflakes drifted softly through the night sky. Inside their little home, the warmth had returned. Not because of money, not because of success, but because two people had refused to let hardship change the way they loved each other. Sometimes, the strongest marriages aren't built during easy seasons. They're built during the winters that almost break them. And Ethan and Olivia had survived theirs. Spring arrived in Banff, and for the first time in what felt like forever, life was peaceful again. The snow slowly melted from the mountains, rivers flowed freely once more, and wildflowers began to bloom across the valleys. Ethan's company was thriving. The eco-resort project had become a huge success, bringing in new clients from across Canada. Financially, they were finally stable again. But every time Ethan looked inside his wallet, he still carried the folded camera receipt. It reminded him of the day Olivia had quietly sacrificed her dream for their future. He had never forgotten his promise. And he never would. One afternoon, Ethan called Lucas. "I need your help." Lucas laughed. "Another construction project?" Ethan smiled. "No, this one's much more important." For the next few weeks, Ethan secretly planned something special. He contacted Mr. Harris, the owner of the camera store. "Do you remember my wife?" Mr. Harris smiled. "The wildlife photographer? I remember her. I'd like to buy the best camera you've ever sold." Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow. "The best? It's expensive." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "She deserves more than the best." A few days later, a beautifully wrapped box arrived at the store. Inside was the newest professional wildlife camera, complete with premium lenses, a carbon fiber tripod, and every accessory Olivia had once dreamed of owning. Mr. Harris smiled as he packed everything carefully. "She's going to cry," he said. Ethan laughed. "I know." Meanwhile, Olivia had quietly accepted that photography was no longer part of her life. She still loved nature. She still woke early to watch the sunrise. But instead of carrying a camera, she simply admired the beauty with her own eyes. One evening, she stood on the porch watching a family of deer walk through the trees. Ethan noticed the way she instinctively reached toward her shoulder, as if her camera were still hanging there. His heart ached. He knew she missed it, even if she never admitted it. A week later, Ethan invited Olivia on a drive. "Where are we going?" she asked. "It's a surprise." She laughed. "You've been acting mysterious all week." "I know. And I'm terrible at keeping secrets." They drove toward the very same mountain road where they had first met 3 years earlier. Snow still covered the higher peaks, even though spring had arrived. When they reached the roadside overlook, Ethan parked the car. Olivia looked around. "This place?" He smiled. It all started here. The two of them stood quietly for a moment, remembering the day a stranger had offered another stranger a cup of coffee. Then Ethan reached into the back seat and picked up a large gift box wrapped in dark green paper. He handed it to her. "Happy anniversary." Olivia looked confused. "Our anniversary isn't until next week." "I know. I couldn't wait." She smiled and carefully untied the ribbon. When she lifted the lid, she froze. Inside was the camera. Not just any camera. The exact model she had dreamed about but never believed she would own. Her hands began to tremble. "Ethan." "No, this can't be." She gently lifted the camera from the box. Tears instantly filled her eyes. "You bought this for me?" Ethan nodded. "You once gave up your dream, so I wouldn't lose mine." He took a deep breath. "Now it's my turn to give your dream back." Olivia couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged the camera tightly before throwing her arms around Ethan. "I don't know what to say." He smiled. "You don't have to say anything. But there is one condition." She looked at him curiously. "What condition?" He grinned. "You have to promise me you'll keep taking pictures. The world deserves to see what you see." Olivia laughed through her tears. "I promise." Just then, a bald eagle soared gracefully across the mountain sky. Without thinking, Olivia lifted her new camera. Click, the shutter echoed softly through the valley. She looked at the photo on the screen. It was perfect. She turned toward Ethan. "This is the first picture this camera has ever taken." He smiled. "It should be. Because sometimes dreams don't disappear forever. Sometimes they simply wait for the right person to bring them back." As they stood together overlooking the mountains, Ethan slipped his hand into Olivia's. Neither of them noticed the sunset painting the sky shades of orange and pink. They were too busy appreciating something far more beautiful, a love that had survived every season. 5 years passed. The little wooden house outside Banff had changed over time. The empty walls were now covered with Olivia's award-winning wildlife photographs. Some had been displayed in galleries across Canada. Others had appeared in nature magazines around the world. The camera Ethan had given her had captured thousands of unforgettable moments. But Olivia always said with a smile, "My favorite picture isn't hanging on any wall. It's the memory of the man who believed in me." Ethan's architecture firm had also grown beyond anything he had imagined. His eco-friendly designs became known throughout Canada for blending modern buildings with the beauty of nature. Young architects often asked him, "What's the secret to your success?" Ethan always smiled before answering, "It's easy to build strong buildings. The real challenge is building a strong home." One crisp winter morning, Olivia walked into the kitchen holding a small white envelope. She looked unusually nervous. "Ethan." He looked up from his coffee. "What is it?" Instead of answering, she handed him the envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a tiny ultrasound picture. For a few seconds, he simply stared at it. Then he looked back at Olivia. His voice barely came out as a whisper. "Are you serious?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "We're going to be parents." Ethan covered his mouth in disbelief. The next moment, he pulled Olivia into the tightest hug he had ever given her. He laughed. He cried. He couldn't decide which emotion was stronger. After everything they had been through, life had given them another beautiful beginning. Months later, on a snowy February evening, their daughter was born. They named her Emma Brooks. When Ethan held his tiny daughter for the first time, she wrapped her little fingers around one of his. His eyes instantly filled with tears. Olivia smiled weakly from the hospital bed. "I think she already has you wrapped around her finger." Ethan laughed. "I've been wrapped around both of your fingers for years." As Emma grew older, weekends became family adventures. Sometimes they hiked through Banff National Park. Sometimes they watched elk grazing in quiet fields. Sometimes Olivia taught Emma how to photograph birds. And Ethan patiently helped her build tiny wooden birdhouses in the backyard. Their home was never the fanciest. It wasn't the biggest. But it was always filled with laughter and love. One December afternoon, when Emma was 6 years old, she asked a question. "Mama, how did you and Daddy meet?" Olivia smiled and looked at Ethan. "You tell her." Ethan laughed softly. "It all started because your dad wasn't very good at driving in the snow." Emma burst into laughter. "Really?" "Oh yes, I drove straight into a snowbank. And then your mom appeared like a superhero." Olivia laughed. "I wasn't a superhero. I just had a tow rope." Emma looked up at them with wide eyes. "So, if Daddy hadn't gotten stuck, you would have never met?" Ethan looked lovingly at Olivia before answering. "Maybe, but I like to believe some people are meant to find each other, no matter what road they take." That winter evening, the three of them drove to the exact place where Ethan's SUV had become trapped all those years ago. The mountains looked just as beautiful. Snowflakes drifted gently through the air. Olivia poured hot coffee from the same old stainless steel thermos she had kept all these years. She handed one cup to Ethan, another to herself. Emma received a cup of hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. The three of them stood quietly, watching the snow fall. Ethan slipped his hand into Olivia's. "You know, I still think about that day." Olivia smiled. "The day you almost crashed your SUV?" He laughed. "No, the day a stranger offered me a cup of coffee." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And I still think about the man who thanked me as if I'd done something extraordinary." "You did." "No," she whispered. "We did." As the sun slowly disappeared behind the Canadian Rockies, Ethan looked at his wife and daughter. Years ago, he had believed success meant money, achievements, and recognition. Now he finally understood the truth. Success was coming home to the people who loved you. Success was having someone who stayed beside you during your darkest winters. Success was choosing each other, again and again, every single day. Because the strongest marriages are not built by grand gestures alone. They are built by countless small acts of kindness, a helping hand, a warm cup of coffee, a quiet sacrifice, a promise kept, and a love that never stopped choosing. Sometimes, the greatest love stories don't begin with fireworks or perfect timing. Sometimes, they begin on a snowy road, with a stranger willing to help. If Ethan and Olivia's journey touched your heart, remember, this true love isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about choosing the same person every single day, through every season of life.